Deuteronomy 22, 9 through 11. Do not plant your vineyard with two types of seed. Otherwise, the entire harvest, both the crop you plant and the produce of the vineyard, will be defiled. Do not plow with an ox and a donkey together. Do not wear clothes made of both wool and linen. Well, this is definitely a mixed fabric. I'm pretty sure that this one has something synthetic mixed with cotton in it. So I think I am...
You're in sin, bro. You're absolutely going against the law of the Lord.
Do you have a pigeon or a dove that you can sacrifice real quick so we can...
I don't, but I am going to have to unhook my donkey and my ox at home now that I've read this.
Definitely do that. Do any of you guys garden?
Nope.
I've attempted to garden.
Have you planted
points in
two
my life.
different types of seeds?
My son has done this on Minecraft. Yes, that counts.
Oh, Minecraft. That's great. That's
the
great.
very first time I ever did any gardening was a school assignment where at school they give you like the egg carton and you have to germinate whatever, six different types of seeds. They were 6 different seeds.
And they were in the same row.
Yeah, and then I went home and I planted them in my yard. I didn't ask. I just ripped out patches of grass in our yard. We lived in a subdivision. It wasn't like out in the country. So my parents just come home and they were like just big bald patches in the yard with little tiny plants in them.
Oh,
like,
my goodness.
What's going on?
Did you make clothes from them afterwards?
No. They all got mowed except for the squash. The squash was the only one that survived.
Yes.
And then it grew one squash and then we cooked it and I didn't like it.
And so that was the end of that. That was the end of Shan's gardening career.
Yeah.
Right there. So obviously the question with this passage is, what is going on? These are in the law of the Lord. Why were these things there? I think is the important, like, what sense did this make?
Because I would say even as New Testament believers who know that we are freed from, the letter of the law, there's still this big question of like, but why was that important in the first place?
Yeah, why was it
seems
important
so
to them?
Arbitrary. What a weird thing for God to care about.
Yeah, and if I'm just reading through the Bible, why should I not skip this? Because it's irrelevant.
And of course, you get this all the time. If you have somebody that's kind of wanting to troll Christianity, they're going to look back at these things. See, well, you don't follow these laws anymore. Why do you follow some of those other laws?
Some would call that person a normie TikToker. That's what Shan always says. Anyway.
Some or one. I know one person who would call that a normie TikToker.
Yeah. So the question remains for us is what to do about this type of passage, and this is kind of a bear because of that.
Yeah, or even if we know we don't need to follow it, what does it say about God's character that He cared about such an obscure, specific action?
Yeah.
Is God a weirdo that He was like, now don't be mixing that linen and wool?
Study Fantastica.
Welcome to Bears Boys Bible Study Fantastica. We are the boys, Sean Walker,
Shan Taylor,
Jason Allen,
and we are going to handle a bear of a text, and we hope that it results in a fantastic Bible study.
Absolutely.
And ideally not just a fantastic Bible study while you're listening to this podcast, but a fantastic Bible study when you take the principles that we're going to learn, that we're going to teach, and you apply them to your own Bible study.
Absolutely.
We enjoy making this podcast, but it's not our primary gig. Our primary gig is we're pastors of the church, so we feel called to equip the saints, meaning we want you to listen to this podcast and to be more able to study the Bible well. And we do this by teaching you hermeneutical principles. Hermeneutics, simply said, are the principles needed to understand the Bible. And so we're going to give you principles that you can learn, take home, put into practice, and be better equipped to study your Bible.
All right, so as we start off, I want to ask you guys an interesting question. There's been some interesting rules that have been passed in different cities in our country throughout our country's history, all right? Have you ever gone, just looking at obscure laws and rules that are out there on the books?
I know of one from
the books, by the way.
The big town that I grew up near, which was Lexington, Kentucky, that you were not allowed to walk down Main Street with an ice cream cone in your back pocket. Because historically people had done that to steal horses. The horse would follow trying to eat the ice cream cone.
Oh, wow.
No longer a major issue, but it's a lot of work to get a law out of the books. And
absolutely.
So it continues.
All those horses went on diets and lost their craving for ice cream is what it is.
Yeah. Is that what happened? So there is a lot of animal laws out there. For example, in Hartford, Connecticut, it is illegal to educate dogs.
You'd really have to define what it means to educate a dog.
No dog education
Does
in
training count?
Hartford,
This
Connecticut.
sounds like the premise for the next Air Bud movie.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it doesn't say in the rule book that dogs can't play basketball.
As long as you don't teach them.
This one's great. It is illegal in Illinois to give lighted cigars to pets. Now, the fact that this was such a problem that they had to do a state law for it in Illinois, people are giving stogies to
my goodness.
their pets. But this may be my favorite pet one. A law in Los Angeles makes it illegal for dogs to mate within 500 yards of a church. You know that some church curmudgeon was like, we can't be having these strays out here, you know?
Or somebody had like a dog breeder live next to a church, and all the kids were just looking out the window on Sunday morning, being distracted instead of paying attention to the sermon.
You're totally out of luck. Totally out of luck.
Learning a different lesson.
There's some
that
other-
Sunday morning, and they're like, we got
They come to church to be protected from stuff like this. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a good one. There's some good food and drink laws as well out there on the books. So in Georgia, fried chicken must be eaten with your hands.
Well, that's just American.
So no forks, you know.
What if you
That's
have
just trying to keep those Frenchies out of our country.
what if you have like bionic hands? Does that count?
Right. It's also in Kansas illegal to serve wine in a teacup. You can serve it in maybe a red Solo cup.
Again,
but not.
that's just trying to keep Brits out of our country. We're just trying to keep foreigners out is what we're doing.
Is that a thing in Britain? Let's
Well,
drink our wine out of a teacup.
They drink everything out of a teacup. They love teacups, right? They're British.
I've never been there.
They love teacups. That's everybody knows that about Britain.
And in case you needed one more, in North Carolina, you can't watch a bingo game for more than 5 hours. That's it. That's your limit.
That's why I can't move to North Carolina, boys. What on earth?
So the question that would come, obviously anytime you see a weird law like that, the question that comes to mind is like, what's the story here?
Right, yeah.
like what is actually going on?
Yeah.
Because none of those make sense necessarily on the surface, or we might try to assume why they're there, but we don't have the context. Like you said, the law with the ice cream cone, and people were using it to steal horses. So you come to this question, and I think the same exact thing is what's going on here, right? We don't really have, these laws were written 3,000 years ago, or plus, actually, probably more than that. And so what is going on? And so the first question that I think we kind of ask when we come to this type of text is, or at least I do, and maybe y'all's thinking is similar, but I ask, is there a practical reason for this law? Like, is there some thing that I don't know about that was going on in ancient Israel at the time that I would say, oh well, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, like maybe it was it was a sacrifice to a foreign god if you intertwined wool. And
right?
cotton
Is there
or
some
something
kind
like
of
that.
like practical? So there are some scholars that try to give some practical reasons for these, and so I'm going to let you know what other people have tried to maybe, and y'all tell me what you think. All right. So for example, the idea of two different types of seeds being planted together. Some folks say, well, it brings to mind like Matthew 13, where Jesus says, "I'm going to separate the wheat from the tares." This type of a deal. And so in the parable, the enemy comes and he sows he sows weeds into the crop so that it doesn't grow as well.
I can understand that being a sin. Yeah,
that would be a bad one.
You made this episode PG. It was not.
It was my fault this time. Yeah. So, in that passage, the enemy comes in, sows in weeds in the middle of the crop to try to, mess it up, that kind of a deal. And so they're basically saying that this law has got to be referring to, like weeds rather than crops, right? And the law is strong about it, calling the fruit from it defiled, this kind of deal. So that must be what it is. It's illegal to go sowing weeds in someone else's crop and this kind of a deal. But I don't know.
It'd be such a strange way to word that.
It is, yeah.
Because the way it's worded makes it sound like it's someone who's doing it to their own.
That's exactly
their own
the way that
field,
it's
right?
Yeah.
And in which case, what we're doing then is protecting idiots from being idiots.
Correct.
Like,
Yeah.
don't sow weeds with your, like, yeah, why would God need to tell us that? That's just common sense.
He says don't sow two different types of seeds, like that. He's not clarifying with weeds or what. So I think this
So I'm
is
going to say bad explanation.
Yeah, that's a bad explanation.
Yeah,
And
debunked.
so some other practical explanations for some of the other ones. Now, as far as plowing with a donkey and an ox yoked together, some use this as the idea of being yoked in the sense of like breeding two animals, and like you shouldn't interbreed two animals. But that's really not what's being said here. A yoke
That's not how they would say that.
a yoke is what you put around the neck of an animal for them to carry, or a load or a wagon, or in this case a plow.
I wonder if there's anybody out there that is concerned about animal cruelty. Like, this is not fair for the donkey.
Yeah, because
Yes.
it's so much taller.
There actually is. That's
okay.
one of the explanations.
Yeah.
Most certainly is that this is a
poor
law.
little donkey.
Yeah, it's that little donkey.
He'd have to do less work because the ox is so strong.
maybe I got it backwards. Then that's not fair for
but
that.
I'm
ox.
saying that if the ox is taller, maybe it puts the yoke on the.
Oh, it's
bottom of the neck.
uncomfortable for
Yeah.
him, but then it's
Yeah.
also more work for the ox.
Yeah.
So this is about animal cruelty, right? That's what God
It's
is
gotta
protecting
be, right?
against.
Yeah, got to be in this situation, even though they had a whole sacrificial system. But anyway,
okay.
we won't we won't go there. Again, I don't know that is really a convincing argument. It sounds practical, but it's not. It doesn't really fit.
So another burnt.
Yeah, another burn.
Debunked.
And then as far as like wearing clothes with wool and linen together, I really couldn't find anybody that was trying to make some practical, explanation of it. Leviticus 19 goes even further than this, actually. So there's that's kind of a sister passage to this one, and says don't weave together any two types of material. So it's even further than even the wool and the linen.
Maybe it's practically it's a issue of, because then it might not be hypoallergenic. Like if I know I'm allergic to wool, but then you mix it together with linen, and I think, oh, I'm wearing linen, but now I've got this horrible body rash. Maybe God is trying to protect against body rashes.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
That's a very practical.
That makes total sense to me. Podcast is over. Let's go home.
Yeah.
Shan's got all the answers.
I cracked it.
Perfect. So overall, when you look at these quote unquote practical explanations, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. And who knows? Maybe there is something that we're just not aware of this far removed from Scripture. But there are definitely some other reasons that these laws in the Old, and there's many others like it. There's definitely some different types of reasons that these laws exist. And I want to look into those here in a second. But I think this brings up our hermeneutics principle of the day. Under the history of the text section, we're going to call it 1B, all right? Because I think the last person selected 1E just for
1.2, okay.
for whatever. And I'm putting mine before it because I think it's more important. No, I'm just joking. It's not. But it is an important one. And here it is that every person brings cultural baggage to the text that the original readers did not have. And I think that is such a key principle for us. We always read the text through our modern American lens, and we bring that to the text. And I call what we have as baggage, because they didn't have that baggage. They were reading it in the sense of they knew what was going on. They would have immediately picked up on this and been like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Of course, we're not going to plow with two different types of animals, or of course, we're not going to interweave, two different types of materials.
Well, can we say that one thing we can be clear about is if the Bible does not explain something, it did not need to be explained to the original audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So whereas we read something and go, I wish the Bible explained this because it seems so strange to us, they were not reading that and going, I have no idea why we are following these rules. And they understood, because of their lack of cultural baggage, the laws and why they existed. They understood that God was not being strange or arbitrary or just having a weird hang up about something that it does not matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And this whole principle, I think, Shan, you immediately alluded to it. The first thing that we try to do as Americans is, well, there has to be a practical explanation for everything that we do. Anytime somebody says, hey, I want you to do something, what is the very first question that we ask?
Why?
Why should we do that? Why does that make sense? That's American. That's a modern thought, that type of thing. We need to know all the reasons as to why and that kind of. And
we're very driven by the bottom line. We're driven by the clock. We're driven by productivity, and so why is a big subtext behind our motivation,
and driven by freedom, liberty. So you can't put something on me, unless you have a good reason.
There's got to be a really good reason for it. And so, and even more specifically, we're also very individualized, right? So it's not just why does this law exist, but why do I have to follow this law? Why is this for me? And so all the attempts that we have to read this from a practical standpoint sound lacking because these laws weren't meant to be read these laws aren't there for quote unquote our practical American purposes that we would think. And so we come encumbered by that thinking.
Do you think sorry to interrupt, but do you think that is partially because we associate laws with these phrases of being clean and unclean? And in our modern understanding of that, we're not thinking of ritual purity. We're thinking of literally germs and not germs, or sickness and not sickness.
Yep.
And so for us, we're misassociating or misunderstanding that term in the first place.
Absolutely.
And so we're making this concept of clean and unclean something that is practical instead of something that is ritual.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And think about even think about I know none of us are farmers here necessarily. Shout out to all the farmers out there who all drive tractors these days, right? Nobody's plowing fields anymore with oxen.
Shan was kind of a farmer, and
he did have that
or whatever.
He did have that one plant,
that one squash that produced one squash.
Absolutely.
Could have made it big in the squash industry.
I'm just thinking to myself, though, if I were to plow a field with livestock, I could probably care less if there were two different. I wouldn't even think twice about plowing as long as it's pulling the plow. Is getting the job done, and that's kind of our thinking. Is does it get the job done? Of course, it gets the job done. So we're good. If I'm thinking about my clothes, I'm thinking about what's comfortable, what looks good. I don't think about is there some spiritual. I'm not thinking those ways.
I think about microplastics in my clothes, how they affect my hormones. You ever thought about that, Shan?
Now we're talking about hormones.
Maybe that's why your mustache doesn't look good, Shan. I'm just kidding. I think it does look good whenever you have it.
It's whenever you have it. I love it.
This was a conversation offline about my wife berating me when I tried to have a mustache for one day. It was the meanest she's ever been to me in our entire marriage for an entire 24 hours straight. It was like being on a Comedy Central roast, but just one woman against one man for 24 hours nonstop.
Nice.
It's because the estrogen coming from the microplastics in your clothes. Anyway.
But again, that's very practical, though. You've just proved Jason's point. You're worried about the microplastics not because of what it says about who you are or the honor or the shame that it might impute upon your character. You're only worried about the practicality of how it might affect your hormones, which are apparently very sensitive and easy to influence.
Well, yeah, but also, if I did have a bad mustache from the microplastics, the shame that would come on me.
There you go.
Yeah.
I am not going to step into this conversation about beards and mustaches because, as you can see, there's nothing there.
Have you considered the microplastics?
It might be the microplastics.
Maybe if you start wearing only wool clothing,
not mixed with linen for sure.
No, or maybe only linen instead of whatever you got going on over there. Maybe your beard will come in.
Maybe so.
That's the practical reason. God wants us to have good beards.
I look like a 15-year-old trying to grow anything on my face, so it's great. So all of that being said, it's hard for us to get our heads wrapped around reasons for doing things that are seemingly, to us, neutral tasks, right? Planting plants is a neutral, there's not a moral side. You're just planting plants. And that makes it incredibly hard for us to get into the mindset of an ancient Jewish person or an ancient Hebrew to see why this law would have had immense meaning and value to them. And so to overcome that, we're going to have to start by doing some study into their mindset, into what made them tick. And we're going to have to try to walk a little bit in their shoes. So anytime you come to a passage and everybody brings cultural baggage to the text that the original readers didn't have. So I've then got to come to a place where I've got to study enough about these original readers and know enough about myself to try in some way, if I can, to unencumber myself from my current culture so that I can kind of walk a mile in the shoes of the people who would have originally read this text. And so that's an incredibly important principle, really, for most any of the Bible, really for a good bit of the Bible. So I want us to take a minute and just kind of get into the mind of an ancient Israelite. And so when we travel or when we get food or when we work in business, rarely do we ever think that those things connect spiritually or morally. Now, we might have a spiritual conversation with somebody. We might run into somebody who's doing something, without integrity or shady, and we might call that out. But as far as most things that we do, like driving a car or going to work or what, most of those things are pretty neutral.
I don't plow a field, but I do mow my grass.
Right. So you're not thinking like, if I choose this push mower versus that push mower, there's going to be some.
If I mow vertical lines instead of horizontal lines, is that saying something or is teaching something or does that mean something?
Yeah, absolutely. These are just neutral things, and we would basically say
vertical line, like.
I guess
you cutting up to the heavens. What's going on, bro? I want your lawnmower.
Longitudinal. if I mow.
All right, I think I know what you're saying.
Longitudinal, latitudinal. Is that a more accurate description?
Okay, now I know what you mean.
East
Okay, gotcha.
West, north, and south. I don't know. Anyway, parallel.
Along the length of the yard as opposed to along the width of the yard.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know what you meant there for a little bit.
All being said, most of us see those things as neutral. Whatever works for you is fine. It's not moral. It's not ethic. It has nothing to do with ethics. It has nothing to do with our faith. It just is stuff we do. But in ancient Israel, our thinking wouldn't really make sense to them. At all. To them, everything had a spiritual overtone to it. Everything that they did. Israel was a people who were in covenant with the living God. Covenant means that basically they had a deal with God. God was going to be their people, and they were, going to follow God's law and represent Him to the world. They were going to be God's people. Sorry, I got that mixed up. I saw
if
your
I had
smirk on
said
your
it
face.
wrong, Sean would have called me out.
That's because he likes me more than you.
Okay, that is a fact. That is a fact.
That's it. So to them, everything had a sense of a spiritual nature to it because they were a people in covenant with God. They were representing God to the world. God had an expectation of them to look different, to act different, to see the spiritual world different. And to respond to the outside world very differently. And so we kind of see that if we go earlier in the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 7. So what we see here in this passage, their whole existence was to be lived differently. They were a covenant people in a relationship with God. They were to stand out, to be different than the nations around them. They were to stick out like a sore thumb to the rest of the world. In Genesis 12, 1-3, God promised Abraham that every nation on earth...
Have you ever just noticed a sore thumb?
A sore thumb?
Have you ever been like, man, that guy's thumb sticks out so bad because it's sore? Like, I'm just in the room full of people and I'm like, whoa, sore thumb, there it is. Like,
Only
it's just...
If you've watched... Have you seen Looney Tunes?
That's true.
I mean,
in
on.
Looney Tunes, it goes, whoop. I think it's a bad saying. Have you, once in your life, have you ever been like, that sore thumb is so distracting to me right now. I can't stop looking. It's so obvious, so apparent.
But have you ever had a sore thumb?
I mean, I've smashed my thumb with a hammer. I've done the Looney Tunes thing.
Yeah, most certainly. So when your thumb is sore and you're just kind of doing life, does it kind of...
Oh, is it sticks out to me?
Stick out to you?
And you hit it on things.
Oh, so I'm thinking of the...
Every time you bump it on something, it
sticks
throbs again.
out like a sore thumb is the saying. Meaning, like in this room, if one of our thumbs...
physically sticking out?
So you can't bend it like that. It's sore. It's swollen. You can't bend it. And then so if you're walking around, it's literally sticking out. It's stiff.
So not like in this room, there's one sore thumb, and it sticks
Shan,
out.
No
Shan
one in the
is
history
scanning
of
the
world
room,
thought that's
and he
what-
is looking
I'm
for
the first
sore
person.
thumbs.
My entire life, I thought that's what the saying
Oh
meant.
my goodness!
Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen it here. We are teaching Shan,
Making
PhD,
history.
on...
I thought like we're in a room full of people and everybody immediately was like, that guy, he's got a sore thumb. It sticks out so bad. I can't see anything else in this room because of that one sore thumb. This saying makes so much more sense than what I thought.
I feel honored, Shan, to
What
be
are
a
they
part
even teaching
of this
you
moment.
in your doctorate program?
I feel honored to be a part of this.
There's
moment.
got to be one other person listening to this who thought
Hey,
that that's what the saying
Most
meant.
certainly, if you're on social media, please let us know if you saw it the same way as Shand or if you saw it the other way. So,
There's got to be one other idiot out there.
they're not going to admit it now.
If like one of your children chimes in and says, "Oh yeah, I thought," okay, that's on you. That's not on them.
That is on me.
Oh my gosh, awesome!
But I believe there's one other person who thought that that's what the saying meant.
There's bound to be. I'll give you that. There's bound to be somebody out there for sure. So, meanwhile,
Dummies unite.
Meanwhile, back at the ranch,
Chime in. Support my wounded ego, please.
Yeah. So anyway, they were supposed to stick out like a sore thumb. And here's the other part of that. Genesis 12, 1 through 3. God promised Abraham, obviously the father of Israel, the nation, that every nation on earth was going to be blessed through his people. And so he was going to use them to be his ambassadors to the world, to be a nation of priests. All right, we see that. Isaiah 49, 6, we see that God is going to use Israel to be a light to the Gentiles, bringing his salvation to the world. Exodus 19, 5 through 6, God says, now, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession out of all the nations, for the whole earth is mine, and unto me you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So we see this idea of being God's representatives to the world, his priests, showing the rest of the world who he is, helping them find them. And even beyond what we see in Scripture, I think if we kind of look at some history about the ancient Near East, there were spiritual issues everywhere. Like if somebody had, if somebody stumped a toe or had a sore thumb, they might say that there was some spirit that was vexing them, or there was some, like there was a spiritual nature to everything.
Well, and there's also no, like, for example, separation of church and state.
Yeah, most certainly.
We would say that's, as Americans, that's a good thing, right? But their governmental structures are 100% related to some kind of spiritual belief that they have.
Yeah, Israel is definitely a theocracy.
Yeah, not even just Israel, but all nations at this time.
Yeah.
The king is king because their God has chosen him, or because he is a God. Mm-hmm. And our government is structured the way it's structured because that's the will of the gods. And so, like, the spiritual realm is completely interwoven with every aspect of their life in the ancient world, whereas we have largely segregated those two topics to different
there's the church stuff over here, and then there's the political stuff. Those are separate. But you're absolutely right. And so as you look throughout Levitical law on into Deuteronomy, it easily interchanges between a law that might be of real moral, like don't murder somebody or adultery, things of that nature, and then quickly jumps to laws like this that have a more spiritual nature, like maybe not overtly moral in the sense that we would think, but definitely they easily jump back. In fact, the passage right after
meaning
this,
there is nothing overtly immoral about planting two different seeds in the same field. That is not. It is not a prohibition because it is evil or wicked in the act in itself, but instead that there's something behind the act.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that easily jump back and forth between those different types of laws. And then on top of all that, with this idea in mind, again, all the parts of Israel's life revolved around that covenant, keeping God's law. They needed to be different. They needed to be, one of the biblical words that we would use is holy, set apart. They were different from the world around them. It's one of the major refrains in the Old Testament. We see it in the New Testament for us. Leviticus 11:44, God tells them to be holy as I am holy. And so they were to be separate from the world, different from the world, purified from the wickedness around them. And this calling wasn't, like you said, wasn't just for individuals. This was the whole nation. They were all in this together. They were all God's chosen people. The nation was formed by God, existed for God. And so this is the mindset under which these laws were given by God. And that being said, the primary value system in Israel was not our primary value system here in the modern West is what's easy, what's convenient, what's the best for the most amount of people. What's going to make your individual life better? That's kind of how we operate with most things. But that was not their value system at all. Their primary value system was not what was practical, but what was spiritual. What is God doing? What role does God have to play in what we do in everyday life? And how can even the small things reflect Him and reflect this covenant? Everything had meaning. Everything had a spiritual purpose to it. And that value system is put on full display here in these laws. And so with that mentality in mind, let's look back at these laws and try to view them from the lens of an ancient Hebrew and ask, what is the spiritual nature of these laws? And that's kind of what we want to see. So let's kind of go back through the different ones. First, you got the crops, right? What is a spiritual reason for not mixing crops in the same vineyard or kind of the same area? So
I'm going to guess it is a cult, like the culture that you're cultivating. So a culture that worships false gods and a culture that worships the same God. You cannot have those in the same place.
Yeah.
So that's represented by two different seeds.
That is definitely a potential translation. There's a couple of different ways of looking at it, most certainly. So it's an interesting word here when you look in the Hebrew. When he talks about, don't do this or it will be defiled, right? It uses, a lot of English translations use the word defiled. But go ahead, what you got?
I want to change my answer.
Okay, what you got now?
Because seed is such a prominent picture in the Bible. So you go back to Genesis 3, the seed of the woman.
Okay.
I'm going to guess it's talking about the purity of the people. So one seed would be the seed of Abraham, God's people who worship God. The other seed would be the pagans. So you don't not just intermarry, but you don't live with those people. Like that's why they didn't live with the Canaanites. They were supposed to destroy them.
Yeah.
That's my final answer.
Anything to add, Shan?
I think that's a great answer.
Awesome.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you.
So most certainly that's a big part of it. I do want to add something though, is that word that he uses for defiled there. You're going to be defiled if you do this, or the crops will be defiled. The actual word used is kadash, I think is how you pronounce it, but it actually means to be holy. So, if you do this, these crops are going to be holy, or set apart.
Yeah.
In other words, no longer useful for the common use, but to be devoted unto the Lord. And it's kind of a hard idea to understand at first, but I think the best way to understand it is through another story. Y'all might remember a story in Joshua about a guy named Achan. They were to go and destroy Jericho, and they were to destroy everything, all the articles. They weren't to keep any of the loot for themselves, every bit of it. And what did Achan do?
Took something.
So he takes some of that, he hides it under his tent for himself. And the wording used to describe that is Jericho was to be devoted unto the Lord.
Devoted to destruction.
It's the devoted to destruction. It is the same word that's used to describe when you bring a sacrifice and put it on the altar and it is to be consumed or destroyed. And so that same thought or that same idea is here. Jericho was meant to be destroyed, and that was to purify it before the Lord. It was meant to be completely consumed. And in this case, kind of what he's saying about these crops is that if you're going to intermingle these crops that way, they're going to have to be destroyed. That they're going to have to be devoted unto the Lord, because this is not going to be for your common use. All right, that kind of a deal. So there's a separation, if you will, between those two. And what the Lord is telling them is this idea of mixed crops is that the people should be set apart. They should be holy. They should be different. They shouldn't mix things together that don't belong together. And most certainly, I think what you're saying is exactly on point. The Lord knew that their temptation would be to mix in with the wicked nations around them. In fact, the passage right after this talks about intermarrying with other nations around them. And they would fail in that, and they would need to be purified before the Lord. And this law, there is something more important God is getting at than farming practices. He is challenging them to remain holy and blameless before him, because they were a covenant people. Spirituality was a part of every aspect of their life. And what is more what is more essential than planting plants to eat for food, right? Like this is, this is absolutely vital to everyday life. And so this was a constant reminder to them that they were to be set apart. They were to be different. They should not intermingle with the nations around them. So there was a big spiritual purpose here.
So this law then became to them a constant teaching tool.
Yeah.
Either to them as a people or to people who are observing them, right?
Yeah.
Because they're meant to be a demonstration of God and God's character to the world, but they're also meant to remember that themselves. And so because they have this regular practice of, no, we're going to plant our wheat over there and our barley over here.
Yeah.
And whereas some people might just plant them together, we're not going to do that. And it's going to, when we're doing that, it's teaching us, reminding us. We're teaching our children, reminding our children, and we're showing the world who God is and who God has called us to be, specifically holy. And so I think another reason we misinterpret a lot of these laws is because we assume as modern people that they were being overly superstitious.
Yeah.
Oh, they think that something happens to plants when you plant them together, and for whatever reason, if you plant wheat and barley together, it's going to grow together and it's become bad, and they have to destroy it. And that's a weird superstition that we know better now than them. But it's not a superstition. Instead, it's symbolic.
Yeah.
So rather than looking at all of these rules as superstitious, look at them as symbolic. I'm learning who I'm supposed to be because of how God is teaching me to plant my fields.
Yeah. And all of these things were reminders to them that they were to be set apart. They were to be different. And that would need to be ingrained in them to fight against what they were around and what they had been influenced by for so long,
So the best way to take off our modern Western cultural baggage is to stop assuming that these laws are A, practical, or B, superstitious, but instead they are C, symbolic. And to ask the question, how is this symbol teaching them something about what it means to be the people of God?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right on.
So great resource. The reason I learned to think in that category is a book called Is God a Moral Monster by Paul Copan. I would highly recommend it. He handles a lot of different topics regarding the Old Testament and these difficulties, but that's one of the things he talks about, and I think that's a fantastic framework for approaching these difficult Old Testament laws. Is what is the symbolism? How is this a learning opportunity, a teaching opportunity for the people of God to learn what it means to be the people of God?
Yeah. So the second one you see is the animals, right? Well, is there a spiritual reason for not yoking two animals together? I think we kind of start to see a pattern coming here with this. And perhaps the most important spiritual reason I think we can draw from this is that one of these animals was considered ritually clean to both eat and to that type of, and to use as a sacrifice. One of these was not. So you had a donkey was not clean, and then the ox would have been considered a clean animal, purified. And so this didn't mean that the donkey couldn't be touched or used for various tasks or any of those types of things. It wasn't like, where the Israelites couldn't touch like a dead body, or they would have to go purify themselves and all that. This wasn't that type of thing, but they had two very different uses, and they two different things that one could be used for more sacred purposes, one could not. So the idea again here, though, is one of being holy, of being set apart, not being tied to or yoked with things that are unclean, things that shouldn't belong together, right? What does light have to do with darkness, right? What does something that's holy have to do with something that's profane? And the Jews would have easily made this connection. It would have made sense to them. Be holy as I am holy. That kind of a deal. They would have been like, oh, okay, well, that's a reminder to us that we need to be set apart from the nations around us, okay? And then, of course, the threads, right? That sounds a little more interesting, actually. There's, of course, a bunch of different folks out there who have different ideas about this. What are y'all's thoughts on the threads? Kind of same concept? Or
about the wool and the linen?
Yeah, the wool and the linen are two different types of material.
I think it's intertwining two things that ought not to be intertwined, especially you look at like marriage. You have two becoming one, and then that becomes a unit. You don't think of a husband and wife apart from each other. So I would say it's...
So I want to give you a wrinkle, though. All right. Dun, dun, dun. All right. So Back in Leviticus, when God describes the garments that are used by the priest, they have an intermingling of linen and wool in their garments.
Is it intermingled as in like they are overlapping threads, or is it one part of the garment is all cotton and then a part that's attached to it is all wool?
You'll have some people that kind of disagree on the wording of that, as far as, if you look at different scholars and different folks that kind of look at it. But I do think it's interesting. And then, of course, gold is woven into those things as well.
Well, so, based off of your wrinkle, is it then saying don't act like you're a priest if you're not a priest?
So one way of looking at it is the whole continuing that same line of, obviously don't intermingle with the nations around you. And I most certainly we can get that from this as well. Some people...
I think my opinion would be based off the context. I would continue to view all of these as the same, different symbols of the same truth. Yeah. And I would say that the priestly garments are in a separate category, that the priest wouldn't have been accused of acting like they're marrying pagans just because they're wearing the garment that they're supposed to wear.
The only pushback I would say to that is based on the tassel verse, right? That comes right after this. So here's let me give you kind of the rundown of kind of this thought here. The tassels on the garments, do y'all know what kind of that represents? It's actually symbolic of priesthood. Kind of the idea that a lot of folks have, or a lot of scholars have, is that there's a separation between the common and the set apart and the holy, right? So you got these priestly garments. Obviously, these guys could, only enter into a certain part of the temple. They could only go in the Holy of Holies, the high priest, once a year. There were certain garments that were worn just for that purpose. Like these types of things, these were important, set apart, representative of God types of things. So basically, one of the ways of looking at this is, if I'm a common person, I shouldn't be dressing like a priest. I shouldn't be considering myself something that is not who I am in a way. All right. But the other side of that is that Israel was, in fact, a nation of priests, right? And so the idea of tassels kind of representing priesthood, and everybody's told to wear them. So there is a sense of, for the nation, that they needed to be reminded that they were a nation of priests, that they were holy, that they were set apart. But at the same time, there was a different level that was there with the priest. Yeah. There's a sense of, for Israel, most certainly, and I would argue for us, though, in different ways, is they needed to take into account God had given them laws of how he wanted to be worshiped, how he wanted to be followed, things that were in place that needed to be a certain way. And so I think overall, kind of what we see, either which way you look at it, there's very much that sense of the things that are holy and set apart need to be kept as holy and set apart, and the things that are common can be kept as common. Kind of as you walk through these. Do you think
the regular conversation in a ancient Jewish household was to like stick your hand out the window? Is today a linen day or a wool day? I mean, they can't check the weather app, right? But if you can't wear both, it's either a linen day or a wool day. One of those is a warmer cloth and one is a cooler cloth. They're so frustrated. It was cool in the morning. They put on their wool, and it gets hot later in the day.
That's just in Florida, bro.
And they're just, it was a linen day. It wasn't.
We could just mix them together. This would be solved.
I know. And then their friend's like, you wore wool. Big mistake, buddy.
You're
it's a linen day.
Basically condemned now, So absolutely. There's another important point I want to kind of just remind us of, and we kind of talked about, we alluded to it already, but them coming out of Egypt, coming out of this polytheistic nation that worshiped the sun and the Pharaoh and all these things, and going into this land of polytheism where people worship Baal or Asherah or Chemosh or whichever one. Spirituality was all around them. The potential to fall away from God, to break his covenant, was all around them. So accessible, so easily. Spirituality was all around. And it is such an easy temptation to go from, well, we're worshiping God and we're doing what God wants, but there's these other gods who can also help us. And if we give a little something to them or pay a little homage to them, then they may help us in some way.
Yeah, we'll just cover our bases.
Yeah, we're just going to cover the basis. And that's what most people would have thought. That's what most people would have done. Well, I'll honor this God over here and this God over here because that's where they roll and that's their area. And so these laws, again, were set as the reminder to the people to be set apart, to remain pure in a world of sinfulness and wickedness and pagan practices. So everything dealt with that, from their livelihoods to the very clothes on their backs. All of these issues were important to point them back to God, to Yahweh.
And understanding the laws in that way makes them sound so gracious and not burdensome at all. I think that as New Testament believers, we look back and go, oh, thank goodness that we don't have to do all of these. And I am thankful for that. I love eating bacon for sure. But part of me is a little bit sad because we have baptism and we have the Lord's Supper where we have these rich symbols where we can teach our children through that practice. But they had symbols in every little thing. Every little moment was an opportunity to be reminded of who they're called to be and be an opportunity to teach their children of who they're called to be. And it's seems a little bit of I'm a little bit sad that we don't have those things of continuous teaching moments through every little thing. I'm also glad that we don't have to be that's the meat pot and that's the wheat pot, and we don't worry about mixing them up or whatever. You know what I mean?
Do you often mix your meat and your wheat together?
Sure. It's called a hamburger.
That was nice.
That was so quick too.
You make them in the same pot?
He just shut that down.
Sure. You don't ever grill your bun in the grease from your burger and get it nice and crispy and a little bit meaty?
100%, sir. Or if you watch Gordon Ramsay, they have that beef Wellington.
Yeah,
that's
a good Jew could never do that, and so
nope.
Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying I want to go back to following all the Old Testament laws, but a little me is I recognize the richness in the symbolism, and that. What a cool thing! And I see those laws as a grace from God and not as a burden from God.
Yeah.
Once you understand them rightly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So then comes the real interesting question is, so what of all that applies to us now, right? We're not in a theocracy. We're not in a nation of priests, so to speak. Most certainly, I don't even do farming. I know Shan was out there as a kid planting that one squash, but nobody's running around with tassels that I've seen recently, unless you've met an Orthodox Jew, kind of a deal.
Big with Elvis. Since then, kind of faded away.
Yeah, probably so. So, as we've already said with our hermeneutics principle, we have cultural baggage that gets in the way of understanding the mindset behind certain things. But at the same time, our situation is vastly different than that of an ancient Jew. Again, we're not a nation of priests. We have foundational Christian principles in this country, but we're not a covenant country before God. That's not who we are. We're no longer under a sacrificial system because Jesus was our sacrifice. We're no longer have priests because Jesus is our high priest who speaks to the Father on our behalf. So there is so much that is different. But there are some things that aren't different, right? There are some principles that we can look at this and say, well, most certainly we should take that into account. 1 Peter 1, 15 through 17 says, we're most certainly called as Christians to be holy as our Father in heaven is holy. That has not changed. God's people, whether that's the nation of Israel or whether that's the church today, God's people are to be set apart. We are to be a sore thumb in the world. We are to be different. We are still represent God in the world as believers. We carry His word. We are filled with His Spirit. We are 2 Corinthians 5:20 says that we are His ambassadors, making His message known. But His gospel no longer goes forward through a nation. It goes forward through His church and as those who have placed their faith and trust in Him. And so the priesthood of the believer looks a little different than the priesthood in the Old Testament. We are no longer making sacrifice for people to God. Christ is the sacrifice. He's done that part. But we are still called to point people to God. We're to point people to Christ so that they can be forgiven and changed. And therein lies the application for us today as we get down to it. As God's people, we are still called to be set apart from this world that we live in. We're called to be different. We have been called to be priests to point others to Christ. Christ has fulfilled the law. Christ has ended sacrifices through His blood. Christ is our high priest who speaks to the Father on our behalf. But we remain ambassadors in a dark and lost world. And so And we're to do that as far as the New Testament is concerned, not just through symbolic type laws, not just through ritual, but not just through following some rules, but showing a life that has been changed by the gospel and a life that is filled with the Holy Spirit. What is the fruit of the Holy Spirit that he produces in us? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. We are to show him by loving the Lord with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, by loving our neighbor as ourselves. Jesus said, they will know that you are my disciples by your love for one another. We show Christ by the grace in us, by forgiveness, by serving others who may not deserve it, by loving our enemies, by saying no to the things of this world, and by saying yes to Christ. We don't do these things to earn grace. We don't follow the laws so that we can reach a certain pinnacle or any of those things. We do these things because we've received grace and because it's a natural overflow of who we are in Christ. And so holiness is a responsibility, but it's also a blessing, a delight, a joy, as much as it is a challenge and a mission, and it's a grace in the midst of all of it. And so you may not need to wear tassels to be holy. You may not need to, have plowing two different animals. We can just use a tractor, I think, these days, and that'll be okay. We may not need to plant seeds. You may not even plant seeds. That's okay. You may not need to worry about your clothes tag to see what's all mixed in there. I think you're okay. But we do need to be holy. We do need to be set apart. We do need to live out a faith that has transformed and changed our lives as believers, because we are Christ's ambassadors. We are in a sense priests to the rest of the world around us. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the message for us. I think that was the message for the Israelites, most certainly. But I think it's still very much the application for us today.
Yeah. And when we live holy lives, we stick out like a sore thumb.
We do.
Shan, we in the business call that a callback.
There you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's good.
Well, do you guys have anything left?
Well, so I would say that because these symbolic laws were both a teaching tool to the people, but also a demonstration of God's character to the world, there would have been plenty of opportunities for the Jews to be answering questions from the world of, why do you do that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense. And that gives them, they wouldn't call them gospel opportunities, but we can think of them in that sense. And so today, even though we aren't worried about not wearing mixed clothing or whatever, right? As the church, we still have lots of opportunities to live in such a way that the world would ask us, why are you doing that? Yeah. And it might not be through very specific, minute, ritualistic laws, but it is through living a holy life that we should stick out like a sore thumb, that the world should notice that we are different, that we are set apart, that we are holy, and that should lead to demonstrating the character of God to the world and in conversations that teach the world who God is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's kind of all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening in. This is
no, it's not. We need Sean.
Oh, that's right. Okay,
Sean's leading the next episode, so he's got to give us the prompt for the AI song generator.
I want it to be like a gospel choir, but I want it to have a lead synth in the song.
Okay,
so figure that out.
Choir with the lead
Tell people what a synth is if they don't know.
A synth. It's a synthesizer. It's the kind of the 80s instrument that you hear that's it's an electronic sounding instrument.
There you go.
There you go. Awesome.
Man, let's go to Wild Olive and get a smash burger for lunch.
Hey.
Some wheat and some meat together.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And we'll go in freedom in Christ, wearing our linen and wool mixed polyester, cotton, whatever we have on clothes.
That sounds good.
That'd be great.
As the priesthood of believers.
Yes, most certainly. All right, guys. This has been Bears Boys Bible Study Fantastica. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.